So, good morning, everybody. I am so thrilled that all of you are willing to participate in the launch of Wise Women and Good Men. I particularly want to thank my two buddies, Julie Winkle Giulioni, the person who knows all about talent development and careers, and Chris Edmonds, who is the expert recognized on workplace culture. So, a little teeny bit about the series before we launch. As I mentioned, this is the first in Wise Women and Good Men. We're going to have monthly conversations with experts. And between now and year end, it'll probably be exclusively in the leadership space. But I've already had requests for people who are interested in things like space. And we are neighbors of JPL and Caltech. And I also have a former NASA head who follows me on LinkedIn, who I think I will tap for that as well. And art and entertainment. And of course, Julie and I are Southern California and very close to the capital of art and entertainment. So if anybody has a thought about anyone or a topic or individuals that they'd like to hear from, please let me know, either via LinkedIn or my website. And with all of that said, they will be 45-minute conversations monthly and LinkedIn, and then we will then go on to YouTube. So there will be a record of it. So let's launch episode 1. And I'm going to start by asking my guests, to whom I'm extremely grateful, a little bit about their journey to their acknowledged areas of expertise. I'm always curious about how people end up doing what they're doing at any given point in time and very fascinated by it. So let's start with you, Chris. How did you find your way? What was the road that took you to workplace culture?
Well, in a nutshell, I was a YMCA executive
Oh,
throughout Southern and Northern California. Did 15 years with that. Learned a whole bunch about managing programs, managing boards, managing teams, and I was blessed as a facilitator because there were career advancement programs that were done, kind of career-ish theme, so
yeah.
that folks that were doing programs could, well, what if I want to be a manager? What if I want to be a leader? What if I want to run my own YMCA down the line, right? So I did that for about 5 years. And then I had a college buddy and YMCA buddy, a woman that went to work for Our Nation Central Bank in downtown San Francisco. And she said, "You need to come meet my boss." So that led to a job there
Mm.
for, I was there about 3 years, and it was an internal training consultant role. So again, doing a lot of
Oh, yeah.
leadership, team leadership. And the Fed is an interesting beast because there's the economists that do policy, and then there's a huge 11-story office building, right? So all the interesting things about offices, I learned a lot. And then we began doing Ken Blanchard's programs in the Fed. And they just got great reactions, and I felt very comfortable with it. And so I reached out. We actually brought Ken himself up to speak to our top leadership of the Fed. And so it was up in Napa. So we had an hour, there and back visiting with Ken. And over dinner, Ken says to my boss and I, "You should come work for us." And I looked at her and I went, she said, "Don't you dare." So of course I did. And I spent 24 years working for
Oh,
Ken Blanchard. And what was terrific about that, number one, brilliant thinker, wonderful storyteller, great writer. So I hope I absorbed a bunch of that from Ken. And starting in about 2000, I began being a trainer for so long. What had really been kind of the undercurrent of why does it work some places and not others? And for
yeah,
me, it was culture. If the
yeah.
workplace culture didn't support the language we were teaching, the skills we were trying to build, it didn't matter. You may as well just set fire to them. I'd rather have some of it. But anyway, so I started proactively doing culture work in 1990. still in my
Mm.
YMCA days. So I kind of put that business aside and then rekindled it. And I retired from Blanchard in 2018 and have been doing this 100%. I'm not smart enough to retire yet. So here we are. So I have a small business. We've got clients that we've worked with around the globe, but mostly in the US. And we'll talk more about the nature of culture work because it's not a training thing and gone. It's a
Right.
long process.
It is indeed. Thank you. Interesting background. And before Julie starts, I need to say, in the interest of full disclosure, she and I met a few years ago, shall we say, when our children, who are now adults, were little guys. I was director of human resources at the Times Mirror Company at the enterprise level, and Julie always was the maven product developer for Zanger Miller. And along the line, she drafted or wrote a program called Frontline Leadership, and I became a certified Zanger Miller facilitator, which is my love and passion, and took a couple of groups through Frontline Leadership. So, Julie, what road did you take that gets you to your recognition as being the person who knows all about talent development and careers?
Well, I don't know that I know all about it, but I'm sure enjoying this journey of learning about it for sure. And it's interesting as I reflect on it, development has been kind of a through line throughout my career. My very first job as a young person was teaching modeling and charm to children. And I frequently reflect upon the lessons I learned about learning itself, working with young people. Because human beings learn and make choices about what they're going to do and whether they're going to change behaviors in very similar ways. And so that was my first job. And then I went on to teach high school for 5 years. I was a
Oh,
professor and department chair at a local university before going back into industry. And what was interesting about those early days in fashion and retail and merchandising primarily, I was not aware of it, but I just lucked into one boss after the other, who was a natural developer of people.
mhm.
I mean, folks who got to know who I was and what I was passionate about, who, when I started to having mastered, one role, created the space for me to take on more. I remember going to the assistant department store manager where I was teaching modeling and charm, and I said, I kind of got this down. And he said, great, what else do you want to do? And I said, well, I'd sort of like to do some special events. And he said, great. And so I was thrilled. No budget. I had my dad
Yeah.
coming in dressed up like Santa, my mother in a bear costume dancing around the store for a holiday event. No budget whatsoever. More engaged than I had ever
Mm.
been. And would talk to my friends and they would be complaining bitterly about these horrible jobs and,
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
routine, mundane stuff. And I was thriving. And it wasn't until I hit like about 30 when I hit my first, and yeah, I think of it as a bad boss, but in retrospect, she was kind of a normal boss who was way
Mhm.
more interested in what I was doing and what I was getting out the door rather than my growth and development. And it was a completely demoralizing, soul sucking experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I knew I needed to get out of Dodge. And interestingly, Chris, you and I share kind of a similar path that way. I was in that role, I was using the Zinger Miller programs.
Ah,
And it
interesting.
was a modular leadership program that I loved. The technology worked, people loved
Mhm.
it. And my sales rep called one day and said, hey, we have an opening for a consultant. Do you know anyone who'd be interested? And of course, my low self-esteem at the time makes me start thinking, okay, who do I know? Who do I know? And I said, well, I'll call you, if I think of somebody. And over the weekend, talking to my husband, I said, I would really love to do that. And he said, well, call her back and tell her that. So I called her on Monday morning and said, Elaine, I do have somebody. She'd be really terrific. Me.
Yeah.
And she said what Ken didn't practice. She said, I wasn't allowed to ask you, but that was what I was hoping you'd say. So I had 10 good years at Zinger Miller as a consultant and a trainer and developing training products before I went out on my own 25 years ago with a focus on instructional design that would,
Hmm. Yeah.
really scale for global and sophisticated clients. And then back in 2012, when Chris and I met, I had the opportunity to co-author my first book around career development with
Yeah.
Beverly Kay. And that gave me a chance to take all of my leadership work and focus on kind of a slightly more narrow corner of
Voice
leadership.
of the pie. Hmm.
And what I've really, come to love about that is, I really see leadership, or I see career development as one of the most powerful tools leaders have to create culture and to create, results through people. And so I've spent a good deal of the last 12 years really focused in on that.
That is one of the tools of the trade for headhunters. They will call people who they are interested in recruiting and say, do you know somebody else? I don't know if it's part of the ethos or whatever, but when you said
Yeah.
that, I had to chuckle. That happened to me a number of times along the way.
Yeah.
So, starting with Julie and then moving to Chris, let's take a deeper dive. So, we've had workplace culture forever, we've had career talent development forever, but why is it now bubbling up to the surface? Why is it a strategic imperative? Julie.
Yeah, I was reflecting on that, Diana, and I mean, we could probably talk for days about this,
Yeah.
but if I were to cull it down to just a couple of things that I'm seeing and hearing and responding to a lot. The first is changing employee expectations.
Mm,
That old employment contract is dead and been ripped up for some time. And especially post COVID, employees are looking for a new and a different relationship with work. If I'm going to show up, and bring my time and talent for my 40 or 60 or 80 hours a week, I want it to mean something, not just for the organization, but also for me.
yeah.
And so there's really an amplified interest in the part of employees around growth, around flexibility, and around well-being. And so I think that's one piece of the puzzle is these, expanded, amplified expectations of employees. And then the other side of it is the need that we have for skilled labor. Um, Demographics are changing, workforce needs are changing.
Yes.
And there is, despite, the way the pendulum kind of swings back and forth from, employees are in the catbird seat or employers are, we have a coming war for talent. There is the
Yes.
expectation that by the year 2030, we are going to be 85 million people short for the roles that are needed. And so that's causing organizations and leaders to really put a greater emphasis on the employee experience and what needs to happen in terms of retaining talent. And then the third piece of the puzzle is, and it kind of fits between those two other pieces, maybe, is the need for upskilling and reskilling. Um,
Yeah.
the world is changing so fast, and the World Economic Council suggests that maybe 59% of us will need to upskill by the year 2030. And in fact, in the 3 years between 2021 and 2024, 32% of the skills required for an average job have changed. A
Wow.
third of the skills required for an average job have changed in 3 short years. And so there's a real common awareness of the need for everyone to look around the corner and begin to prepare so that we can future proof ourselves, our careers, and the organizations that we serve.
Wow, that is amazing. Those statistics are
I know.
daunting.
I
So,
know.
yeah, Chris, what about you? What are your thoughts? You can, of course, add to, you can underscore all of the above.
Well, some of the same, let's call it characteristics of the workforce and kind of global society also influence leaders' perceptions of culture. For the most part, most leaders have really never been asked to pay attention to culture. They certainly haven't been asked to fix it.
Yes.
Very rarely have leaders experienced a successful culture transition, much less led one. So we've got this wonderful pool of folks that may see that the culture they have isn't quite healthy, but they don't know what to do about it. And I would agree wholeheartedly with Julie. There's generational influences that are pretty different,
Mhm.
and we are getting wonderful insights on Gen Zs and even millennials who are not quite the younger right generation in the workforce, but Gen Zs are going to be what, 30% of the workforce before 2030. So the workforce is changing, and the old, oh, I hate to say it, command and control, authoritarian kind of leadership style, which is very comfortable for many leaders, um, is just Gen Zs aren't going to put up with that, and
Right.
millennials don't like it much either. And to be honest, us baby boomers really never liked it. So there's an interesting opportunity for leaders to pay attention, number one, to the quality of their work culture. And the second piece is the pandemic and the Great Recession
Yes. Yeah.
splash, which was resignation being kind of what splashed up into the media. And unfortunately, there's not been a lot of learning by leaders of how do you make a workplace attractive to different generations. What do they want?
Yes.
What do they look for? How do we actually, God forbid, accommodate different social style preferences,
Hmm.
kind of
Yeah.
almost the ethnicities we all grew up with is very, very different. I remember some of the families of my teenage friends where I went to their houses for dinners, and there was, oh my God, there was Italian, oh, there was Mexican. I was in Southern California, and it's like
Oh, yeah.
we don't do any of this. This is really cool, kind of a thing. And what's interesting is leaders don't look to themselves as a core reason why they could still be losing top talent. And so there's some wonderful research. MIT Sloan did a study in 2021 about the demand for respect that
Mhm.
millennials
Yeah.
and Gen Zs wanted. And it is growing in strength. And Gallup did a study last year, 2024, about Gen Zs wanting to have purpose driven work. And imagine going to a classic industrial age leadership thinker. You need to build purpose into meaning, significance into the workplace. So there's a huge gap there on what it is that your culture is like, what the employee experience is like today. And two, once you find that things aren't very good, Mark Babbitt and he's my business partner. He
Mhm.
says people don't give a crap about culture until it fails. And it fails all the time. And when it fails, what do you notice? Well, there's anger, frustration, there's absence of teamwork. As it gets worse, there's toxicity, harassment. You end up losing really talented people. And Julie, you said 85 million short of the skilled talent, and we don't care what country they come from. We need them just as we've needed them for the
Yeah.
past 50 years. Bring your brains, bring your hearts, bring your passion. And we're in trouble. And as leaders begin to see that they're losing top talent, they usually go to HR or OD, organization development, and say,
Yeah.
could you fix this? And one of the things that's very interesting is that, well, we'll just raise salaries. That will fix
Mm.
everything. And Gen Zs have been known with greater frequency, 30-40% from the Gallup survey in 2024. They turn jobs down with better
Right.
payroll, better revenue, better salary because the culture sucks, because the culture falls short, because people don't talk on LinkedIn, on Glassdoor about how great their bosses are. So we've got a lot of work to do. And the way we look at this current worldview is there's a lot of cultures that are lousy. And if leaders are willing to admit it to themselves, then there's a bunch of us that can help with that.
Yes, absolutely. I love all of the topics. And of course, I'm a huge admirer of both of you. I follow both of you. And some of the topics that have come up lately that really hit my soul were the generational differences when we have Gen Z, which a somewhat common refrain is, I don't feel safe, all the way up to we baby boomers who did grow up under the military model of the boss said jump and we asked how high. And sadly, many of us adopted those traits. So that's something each of you has dealt with. There's also been this whole idea around safety in the workplace and how do we grapple with safety in the workplace. I really like the fact that both of you and I recently dealt with this notion of it's not what you say, it's what you do. It's these companies that have these plaques that say, we believe in, and employees come first, but their deeds do not follow. And sadly, a lot of leaders don't even see that. So I've been fascinated by that. Julie just wrote an article about the introverted leader, which really caught my attention as well. So those were ideas or those were topics that each of you dealt with that touched my soul. But I'm just curious, what are your kind of the moment, one or two bullet points that you haven't yet discussed you'd like to take a deeper dive in? So we'll start with Chris this time and then go to Julie. So take it away, Chris.
Well, I think what is very, very clear is that every year that comes by, there's a new, oh my God, X is happening and it's going to ruin business. It
Yeah.
requires completely different leadership thinking. And the reality is we really already know what effective leadership is. It's full of grace. It's full of relationship foundations that honor others. I've got a bumper sticker, and I would need a really big car for this bumper sticker to work. But but employees of all generations want workplaces where they're respected and validated for their aligned ideas, efforts, and contributions. That doesn't happen today. It's far, far, far too rare. And so when a leader, it's very interesting because we are in discussions with one of our, this is it will be the third company that this CEO has asked us into. So it's like once we're able to help leaders see there's a system here and there's a discipline involved, but if you can kind of embed this, the culture gets really good. And you keep
Mhm.
smart people, you attract smart people, way more fun, way more proactive problem solving and service creation. So we're now in talks with the third company of this particular CEO. And we just love the fact that if we can find in the hearts of these leaders, your whole job is to serve.
Mhm.
And if you're in the mode of we need to produce, we had a boss who was thinking about hiring us who said, I don't care how happy people are, I just want them to produce. I don't think we're going to be able to help you, kind of thing, right? But
Mhm.
but the idea of having leaders understand that demanding people come back to the office after the 4 years that we've had, you've given autonomy, flexibility, and support. You may not have realized you were supporting people doing remote work well, but there's a whole lot of people who will not go back into the office. And it's going to look like, could it look like quiet quitting? Could it look like I'm going to quit and leave, or worse, quit and stay? So there's some real hurdles coming,
Not
and
even,
the old way of thinking, even old as 3 years ago, much less 40 years ago, it's never going to serve people well. So those are the things that we're seeing, and it's hard for us. I have to tell a quick story. One of my best friends, longtime friends, YMCA, we met in the Y.
yeah,
She and I both grew up in LA. She's an African American woman who is one of the most brilliant thinkers I've ever interacted with. And she's twisted, which is a must for me.
yeah.
But she, in our YMCA days in the Bay Area, she was working with a finance committee of the Santa Clara Association. Big, big, big operation. This was 30 years ago. And she was in charge of childcare. Now, back then, that was a
Mm.
huge, huge growing need. And so she presented the finance package for the coming 5 years. They all blessed it, all white guys, all young. I mean, it was kind of classic Silicon Valley back then. And I we had a lunch date within a couple of days after that, and she said, "My mother, if she'd have heard me in that meeting, she'd have said, 'Honey, they've turned you into a 40-year-old white guy,' because that's what you have to do. The language, the tone, the experiences, the examples you give. There, Mark and I in Good Comes First talk about boomer
Yeah.
male syndrome, that others have to operate like boomer males, whether you're male or boomer or not, because that's the best way to lead. Well, it's not. And
Yeah.
so I still laugh about Ann Phillips giving me that insight.
Well, thank you so much for that. I mean, what comes to my mind is the tyranny of quarterly earnings. And I know myself that I was an employment lawyer that was recruited to a large utility, which is now being sued for starting the Eaton fire, by the way. And it has changed from a customer focused organization with monopoly franchise that's chasing quarterly earnings. And, to me, I've seen a deterioration in culture over the years, which is sad. Julie, take it away, my friend.
Well, just a couple of things. I'm looking at some of the comments
Uh-huh.
in our chat, and thank you, Jay. Jay has pointed out that command and control, that militaristic leadership style, does have its place. Sometimes when there's urgency and emergencies and that kind of thing, that makes perfect sense. And I loved his comment about power being in diversity, inclusion, and belonging. He also speaks to the importance of meaningful work. And Sayer Darling, one of our friends and followers, had a question about whether we had thoughts for changes to the hiring process and the practices that recruiters are engaged in, like ghosting employees and whatnot. And just looking at that, Chris, I immediately reflect on what you were talking about, that the demand for respect. And there's
Yes.
little that's less
Mhm.
respectful than ghosting an employee, and there's little that's less bright either in terms of the visibility, the transparency, social media that gets out, and one's employment brand is really key, especially as we move
Yes.
into an increasingly competitive marketplace. So thank you, and if you have any questions, make sure that you put them in there. Um,
Absolutely.
so, Chris, you kind of launched into that by saying, there have been countless times when you've heard X is happening and it's going to ruin the business. And for me, when I'm hearing the X to be these days is AI. It is just, I was recently at the Association for Talent Development conference. And I have to say that probably every other workshop and breakout session had AI somewhere in it.
Mhm, mhm.
And it's been interesting as we grapple with AI and figure out, the challenge really becomes, I think, for leaders whether we're talking about supporting the development and growth of others, or building a culture that's magnetic and going to attract the talent that you want. It's really about how do we elevate what I refer to as HI, the human intelligence, in this AI world, because clearly there are tasks that AI is much better suited to do. But what it's not suited to do is bring humanity to our relationships, and so, it's interesting. I mean, it's like with any new tool. I remember, I'm really dating myself now, but I remember I used to hand write out instructional design and facilitators guides, and I would fax them to a desktop publisher. You too, Chris. Okay, fax them to a desktop publisher who do that, and then fax them back to me, and I'd mark it up. And this is how we wrote instructional materials back in the day. And suddenly my company, Zinger Miller, gives me a laptop and they want me to write on a laptop. I was like, oh my God, no, the creativity is going to be gone. How would I ever, And so for several months, I hand wrote, my stuff, and then I typed it in and did my work on it. But the resistance, or the things that we hear about, what folks had to say about the breakneck speed of the train system that was going to be, ruining society. And so, we get these new technologies and these new tools, and we have, all of these reactions to them. But we really, have an opportunity right now. I mean, we're on the threshold of doing some remarkable work if we kind of figure out how to cobot, with the systems. What we want to, and what serves us well to delegate, that gives us more space and time and energy for those higher value strategic sorts of tasks, and I look at my relationship with AI, which my husband is sometimes a little jealous of, I think, because I've got that, sexy, Australian male voice speaking to me at all hours of the day or night. And as much as I love him, and as much value as he brings, he can't demonstrate genuine curiosity and
Right.
care for me. He can't offer lived experience. He can't give me sort of contextual judgment about the politics of the situation, or the culture, or the underlying unspoken dynamics. I mean, there's so much that we as humans are uniquely suited to bring to our development relationships and our culture building efforts, that when we partner together, there's really such wonderful potential for us to elevate the quality of the employee experience, while also elevating the results that we can deliver to customers in the organization.
Okay, so my excuse me, my all-time favorite movie is 2001: A Space Odyssey. And there's this very cool theater in Highland Park, close to where I live. And my youngest daughter and I saw it a few weeks ago. And Hal was damn scary. So I think there's fear about that. And I didn't realize, I forgot about it because I probably hadn't seen the movie in a number of years. But at the very end, before Coeur d'Alene is, disassembling the knowledge that Hal, the AI, had, one of the characters comes on stage, or excuse me, on a video, and says, talked about the intelligent life they had found, which was this, large kind of,
Obelisk.
yes, thing, and said that nobody on the trip knew about it except for Hal. So I thought, oh, that's why he became crazy. So, question: how do you handle employees who are fearful of AI, that either it's going to take their job away or it's going to become Hal? So, wait, Chris, why don't you take that one? That's a one that just popped up in the course
Yeah,
of
yeah,
our conversation.
it's very interesting, and I've experimented a bit. I've got a wonderful friend, client as well, and colleague named Tamara McCleary, who is a futurist. She is very active on LinkedIn, and she keeps pushing generative AI for anyone and everyone. If you have a job, if you have work you want to do, project you want to do better at, this can help you. It won't replace you. It won't replace your life experience and your passions, but it can
Mhm.
enhance things and it can raise some cool questions. So I have mostly waited for Tamara to tell me what to try. But
Mhm.
I know there are folks in my family, and my brother's kids are now in their 50s, and with their kids, and it's their kids that are experimenting with stuff. And
Mhm.
so they're a little bit of this. And my stepson uses AI every day in his project management role. And so there's some very interesting ways of seeing change. And if the change is threatening, then we've got all kinds of cool ways of distancing ourselves from it.
Mhm.
But one of the things that's interesting for me, both my parents suffered from dementia, and
Mhm.
dad passed at 91, and mom, God love her, passed at 97. And the last few years, they were not able to communicate much. But what's interesting is that they went through all kinds of interesting societal changes
Mhm.
and
They
were
did.
able to figure out, well, how's this going to help? What's this going to do? My dad was commissioner of real estate in the state of California under George Mason for 8 years, and all kinds of interesting technology was happening in the
Mhm.
80s. And so there is a benefit of using our brains and kind of testing things. So yes, there's guitars hanging on the wall. I'm a working musician on the side, like I have free time. I just found a lap steel guitar that is, it's not a pedal steel, which is a little more involved, but it's got
Mhm.
8 strings. These guys all have six. I have
Yes.
no idea what I'm doing. None. But I'm going to YouTube and I'm doing lesson number one from some really smart people. And have I made musical sounds yet? No. But there's a piece of me that wants to keep my brain engaged and active, and maybe that'll help me serve others. So
Well,
that's kind of the how do we
yeah.
get out of this AI thing?
A couple of things. I find myself being a little upset because I feel like I'm training AI. I feel like even when I have fat thumbs, so when I do a text sometimes, I'll look back and I'll see a word that had absolutely nothing to do with the conversation. It was input. I correct it. So I feel like, darn it, AI, I'm your teacher again. But then 60 Minutes reran something with the Khan Academy. I don't know if either of you saw it, but it was
Yeah,
fascinating about how teachers can integrate AI in. It really is a time saver, but they're also able to tell after the fact how much was AI generated and how much was the student. But anyway, Julie, how are you dealing with, or what are your recommendations for the fear factor that especially older employees, let's be honest, are feeling
Yeah,
about
yeah,
maybe threatened by AI? So what's your
yeah. Classic change management, right? When
Mm.
something new comes in and we want to encourage others to explore it, we've got to figure the WIIFM, right? The what's in it for me?
Yeah.
What's the benefit? And when it comes to AI, I think the least threatening dimension to start playing with is learning. And it's interesting, Jay Allen in our chat said continuous learning has been a source of survival from the very beginning. And
Yes.
people know that intuitively. I mean, we're reading the headlines. We know the world is changing fast. If we don't change with
Mhm.
it, something bad's ahead. And so being able to help people realize the personal benefit to start playing with AI from a learning standpoint. And I've been fascinated, just talking to my sexy Australian man there. We had a beeping in the garage, and I couldn't figure out, is it my car? What's going on? And finally figured out it was a garage door opener. let him listen to it, explain what was going on,
Wow.
immediately learned what the situation was and
Wow.
how I
Yeah.
could fix it. Small moments saved me hours of going through websites or manuals or anything like that. Huge benefit. So if we can help people recognize this might just be a tool to help you learn. And by the way, who's got time for learning anymore? I was just reading a study from Gallup.
Yeah.
Time continues to be the number one reason people don't engage in learning or career development. Having a tool like that that's really embedded in your workflow where it takes no time whatsoever to ask the question and get the answer, or to say, I'm having trouble with this employee. What are 3 steps I could take? A couple of experiences like that will quickly show people, wow, this is a way to help me be better at what I do and free up the time and the space to do the things that I really want to do in this role.
I'm finding because, like probably you two, I have premium LinkedIn. So every once in a while I'll say, do you want me to rewrite it? And I will often have them rewrite it. I will admit I very rarely take it. I sometimes will take portions of it. But recently, because of my, background as an employment lawyer and HR, I was writing a couple of separation agreements, and AI on Word kept underlining things that really couldn't be changed. They have, in the oldie moldy days, lawyers were paid by the number of words. And so they tend to be wordier. I tend to do the Ernest Hemingway model. I try to take out the whereases and heretofores, but nonetheless, there are certain words that will get underlined that really need to be in there. And so once again, I go back to, oh gosh, I guess I'm writing AI again, which is, I guess, okay. It's part of what's happening. So I hate to say it, you guys, it's 10:42 and we've come to the end of our time. And I had all
How
these other
time
questions I
flies.
wanted to ask. Time does fly. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give you each a minute, and then I'm going to take a minute just to kind of wrap up. So who wants to go first?
Julie, please.
Well, thank you, Chris. And thank you, Diana, for allowing us to be part of this inaugural episode of your series. I'm really excited to see where you take it. And it sounds like you've got some wonderful topics to look forward to. And I guess in closing, I would just say when you look at the challenges before us in the workplace, and there are, let's be honest, there are plenty of them. When you look at those challenges,
Mhm.
the key really comes down to where can I take action that'll make a difference? And developing people and cultivating a constructive culture, those are two of the most high value outcomes and tools that we can use to be able to deal with the complexity and the ambiguity and the challenges before us. So thanks for allowing us to spend some time digging into those two kind of levers that will help leaders everywhere be more successful.
And you are on the spot. 1 minute exactly. Go for
Ah.
go for it,
The
Chris.
pressure, the pressure. Well, I want to again thank you, Diana. Again, delightful, Julie. We haven't talked live in way too long, because I learn a lot in these
Mhm.
podcasts, and the ability to kind of and what popped up for you, Diana, was a perfect place to kind of have us dig a little bit and learn some neat application tools from Julie in her garage. I think that's very cool for AI. But I want to reiterate that culture drives everything that happens in organizations, and too much of what happens isn't
Mhm.
good. It's not good for customers. It's not good for employees, and it can cost you money. So our process, and I think it's one that I would coach any candidate to look at the culture of a company they're considering joining. And there's two things that we emphasize. One is make respect as important as results. And that's hard to do. That's not something that's common. But you, just as you manage performance expectations, monitor it, praise, redirect, do the same for formalized, measurable, valued behaviors. And you can create an organization where the buzz is great, people come and flock to you, and they'll have better careers for it.
Well, thank you both so much. I am so grateful and honored that you were willing to be my inaugural guests. And I would just say that I try to ask myself each day, what have I learned today? And based upon what I've learned today, what will I do differently tomorrow? So thank you so much again. And I hope you will participate in future conversations.